No man is an island. The world around me helped me to where I am today. All my teachers, family, and friends taught me about the web of life. We are all interconnected in ways we can't even imagine. This book will help detail the web of people who helped me on my journey. My brother and I were born December 24th, 1952, in Pasadena, California. We had an incredible childhood. My dad and grandfather owned an aerospace company. The first house I remember was near an orange grove. My brother and I would sneak through the fence and walk in the orange grove. There was a tree house and we could climb up on it. We were probably 3 years old. Our house was years ahead of its time. My father and grandfather were both inventors. They developed a house where you could walk in the house, clap your hands, and the lights would come on. The outlets weren't on the walls, but hidden in the carpets. We had sensors that when it rained, the windows would close. My mom would watch us in the backyard by a video camera while she was cooking dinner. This house was featured in the Los Angeles Times home selection. This is back in the early 50s. In the early 2000s, I saw a Burger King commercial where my mom was making hamburgers. The frying pan was floating in the air. The stove used induction coils. At that same time period, they developed a Jeep that could shoot at its tires and nothing would happen. This Jeep could float downstream. It was lighter and got more miles per gallon than the standard Jeep. They tried to get the United States government to buy the Jeeps, but after several years of losing bids, they saw the handwriting on the wall. If you don't have inside connections with the government, you could have a futuristic Jeep and nobody would care. During this time, they came up with a way to make houses that would cost 1/10 of the present day house. It was all modular. They could put up a complete house in a week. The trade union was strongly opposed to this. Consequently, it was never marketed. I guess those early years really had an impact on me. I subconsciously adapted to always looking towards the future and bring that technology back to the present. One of my first was multimedia. Even before multimedia was born, I had a company with a good longtime friend, John Slowski. We developed a visual database for the real estate market. You could put in a search for a house, and all house which matched the criteria the house would come up. When you saw a house you liked, it would take you on the tour of the house. The program won awards at trade shows, but it was far too ahead of its time. We developed some trial photo database programs for the Department of Justice, but finally lost to IBM, who bidded $1 for the job. One of my first impressions when I was young was that when my brother and I was born, I said to him, "You go first and check it out." My brother remembers going down a long, bright tunnel in ecstasy and then told me to come down. I remember it was a rush and both of us laughed inside. When we were young, my brother and I had our own telepathic communication with each other. A lot of people thought we had communication problems because we didn't talk English very well. I remember our state of communication was nonverbal, but with thoughts, pictures, emotions, and experience. It was like if you wanted to know about an apple and you never seen one. Talking was one way to explain about an apple. Another way was to graphically send the experience of an apple. I remember hearing stories about tribes in the South Sea Islands who would communicate with their loved ones telepathically. Today, we use telephones. Our sense of communication is more physical. It's kind of funny that people think it is mystical when it's probably very natural. We have simply not used this communication, so we forget we ever had this ability. So now we scope at the idea that men can communicate in ways that we don't imagine. My brother and I loved to play jokes when we were kids. I remember that one joke we played was on our bus driver coming home from kindergarten. As the bus driver drove us home, we realized that our mom wasn't home. Usually, when this is the case, the driver can't release you. You have to return to kindergarten. My brother and I definitely didn't want this to happen. As soon as the bus stopped, my brother and I ran out the bus and ran to our front door. It was locked. So we ran to the back of the house and entered another door. The bus driver was amazed. He knew what happened. He started to yell, "Open the door. You have to return to kindergarten." We both made faces. Fortunately, my mom came home and resolved the situation. When my brother and I were babies, my mom put fingernail polish on one of us to tell us apart. We used this to our advantage growing up. In the 5th grade, we would switch classes for the fun of it. All the kids in the class would get a kick out of that. I remember one event which totally changed my life. In 6th grade, my brother and I had a paper route. My brother wanted to buy a surfboard. My parents said, "Save your money and you can." At that time, I didn't care one way or the other. On Christmas Day in 7th grade, my parents gave us money towards a brand new surfboard. From that moment on, something clicked in my consciousness. It took us only 3 months to buy our new boards. We bought a Gordy surfboard in Huntington Beach. These boards were priceless for my brother and I. My father would take us after school and on weekends. My life from then on was of the sea. I felt totally at home. All my problems would disappear into the ocean. My happiest moments in junior high school and high school revolved around the ocean. It's hard to explain the excitement of riding a wave. Such joy and happiness comes from this experience. As a child, surfing was a form of meditation with me. I would love to wake up early in the morning and my dad would drive us to the beach. I loved the early mornings. It was a spiritual experience to be in the ocean and experience the harmony of nature. During my summer of my 7th grade, my brother and I would be dropped off at a beach called Big Corona. We would surf for 5 hours, and then we would paddle home about 4 miles. We would arrive home exhausted, and my dad sometimes made homemade pizza for lunch. We had a great summer. Surfing taught me to leave all my troubles on land and to be in the majesty of the ocean. The ocean was a great place for healing. It was alive. I will never forget my first wave riding a surfboard. My dad gave my brother and me a surfing lesson from the famous surfer of the time, Mickey Munoz. We got out of school early one day and drove 45 minutes south to a beach named Doheny. We waxed our boards and paddled out to the wave. I remember when it was my turn, Mickey Munoz gently pushed me into a small wave. It was probably 1 foot, but this 1 foot wave gave me such an exhilaration. I felt I was riding a 10-foot wave. Inside I was screaming, "Yes, yes, yes." There was so much joy and bliss that I knew I was hooked. Surfing from that moment on became part of my life. Years later, I feel so grateful with my connection with surfing in the sea. It literally saved my life. It was my home and refuge. It was a place on earth where I could go and be alone with myself. I developed a strong bond with the sea. Surfing at that time represented our primordial roots with life. All life is based upon water. Without water, our whole world would die. How incredible that human beings can ride the waves of life. We take it so much for granted. I feel that without surfing, I probably never would have survived my teenage years. Surfing was a vehicle to experience something far greater than I learned in schools. It touched the very source of life itself. I needed in my life practical ways to experience the glories of life, and surfing could provide me with that experience. I knew as a youth that we're all going through the motions of life. We were taught to memorize and not to question our existence. So many times the dreamers would get scolded, "That's how it is. Don't ask questions, just carry on." Surfing allowed me to ask questions and to experience the wonders of life. I knew I was protected and my life was on track. Years later, I realized that surfing brought me in contact with Gaia, the Mother Earth. I could go surfing and all the troubles of life would go away. The planet is alive and conscious. I learned this at a young age. Surfing brought me the experience that the ocean is alive. It communicates to you by the power of love. Talk to any surfer and they will say the same thing. Maybe they can't put words to it, but they will agree that the ocean is a marvelous place. One experience I remember in 8th grade was every day I would see this girl named Patty Tucker going down the hall between the 4th or 5th class. We would simply smile at each other. I took her to the Sadie Hawkins dance. Years later, I saw her at our 20th reunion, and both of us remembered how powerful that experience was. It's amazing how some experiences get carried along with you the rest of your life. I'm sure years later, this experience will linger. How powerful we are humans. Just a mere look and no words can generate such a powerful experience. Our feeling was an interconnectedness. It was beyond boring, girl. It was a simple recognition that we are alive, and we both recognized the beauty of it. It was beyond words. Not one word was ever spoken between us in that hallway. How incredible, years later, I can still feel the magic of those moments. One experience I remember was in Little League. I was stepping up to the plate and the catcher, Ricky Nixon, the nephew of Richard Nixon, told me that a young Indian boy born in India would someday come to the West and teach knowledge of oneself. Years later, after meeting Miraji, this experience filtered back to my consciousness. The Indians believe that the whole universe is being recorded like a video camera. Man has the potential to tap into the energy fluctuations and bring back experiences from the past and the future. Take Nostradamus, the famous French philosopher. He had the ability to foretell the future. Every human on the face of the planet has this potential, but it remains hidden. I'm sure that years later, Ricky Nixon never remembered saying such a thing. Can our minds be used like an antenna and prophesize things in the future, and yet as humans, we are totally unconscious about it? I remember years later this episode. Even back then, I had signs in my life to relax, enjoy this ride of life. Patience pays off. We just have to be persistent, and in the end, everything will come to fruition. It was kind of funny that years later, Richard Nixon became president. I remember during the Watergate crisis, I was glad he had to leave office. Years later, I have a different perspective on things. But before he died, I admired him for being a great statesman. He was crucified by the world, and yet he came back and carried on with dignity. My view of him changed. I guess you would say I had love and compassion for him. I felt he was an old wise man for America. Over the years, my feelings and thoughts changed. During the Nixon era, I was very much against the war. I was anti-Nixon. But over time, we can respect those whose ideas don't follow our own. I'm yearning to be more open and accepting of other people. Years later, I can see that God always provides hints that He is inside of us. Mark Mcclellan. Mark had a huge influence in my life. We were neighbors. He lived across the street. I spent many hours with Mark and his family. Mark is extremely kind and loves the adventures of life. He loves to snow ski and spent many years snow skiing. Mark introduced me to many different kinds of music. He was always sharing me different points of view. People like to be around Mark. Kevin Charles, another good childhood friend, said to me about a year ago, "Who wouldn't like Mark? Mark is the kindest person I've ever met." Yep, that's true. Mark has a spark of life. Maybe he gets that spark from his dad. Spark is his dad's name. Knowing someone that long, Mark has a deep place in my heart. We have had many incredible adventures along the way. I call Mark about 4 times a year to keep in touch with him. Mark will forever be young at heart. He loves life, and life loves him. Recently, I had a phone conversation with my sister Jane, and she told me a story about Mark that I had forgotten. Many times when my sister would make her famous chocolate chip cookies, Mark had this uncanny ability to either call or come over to our house. And this happened many times. In fact, when at a certain point my sister saw that Mark would call or come over, and he did. This was a great joke for us. How did Mark know? Good question. Was it by chance? I don't think so, because it happened so often. Or Mark has a keen sense of smell. He lived across the street. Mark would have been an incredible hatha yoga practitioner. He could do yoga moves like I have never seen before. I was flexible, but Mark was off the charts. Jinx and red licorice. My sister reminded me of another cute story. One Christmas, my brother and I gave my sister 500 sticks of red licorice. That was her favorite candy. After a few months, she was down to 4. She decided to share the last 4 with the brothers. She handed each of us a stick of licorice. When she handed me, I accidentally dropped it. We had a poodle who scooped it up and ran out of the house with us 4 kids chasing the dog. It was quite the scene. It's amazing how each one of us has different memories that come up when we think about our childhood. I forgot all about these 2 incidences until my sister reminded me. At that point, it was an easy recall. Just think, all our memories are there, but at times we need a trigger to remember them. Joyce Caldwell. I have known Joyce since 5th grade. She always been kind to my brother and I. For example, she knew my brother and I loved to surf. Her dad was a member of the Mackerel Corporation, who at that time owned the Hollister Ranch, were known as simply the best surfing spot in California. It was on private property, and you needed permission to get in. If you had a boat, it took probably around an hour to boat it. Joyce was kind enough to ask her dad, and he said yes. My brother and I went to Joyce's house and met her dad. My first impression was, wow, what a kind man. He had such a kind demeanor. So this is where Joyce gets her kindness from. I never met Joyce's mom, but I knew Joyce's brother Scott, and he had the same kind demeanor as the rest of the family. How kind was it for Joyce to ask her dad? She didn't get anything out of it. She was kind and didn't think about herself. Same goes for Joyce's dad. The Mackle Corporation owned the place and could have said, absolutely no, you're too young. We were only 16 years old. But her dad was kind. I felt he included my brother and I part of his family. He trusted us and gave us permission. My brother and I had many great adventures surfing their ranch. Imagine given the keys to heaven. This is what it was like. We surfed a place that was so pristine. During the spring, there were incredible wildflowers. My brother and I were awestruck by the beauty. At night, thousands of stars were in the sky. At times, we were the only ones on this beach for miles. We could pick and choose whatever surf break we wanted. Years later, each time I see Joyce, I thank her and her dad for such a precious gift. Kindness goes a long ways. Mark Blackburn. I've known Mark since kindergarten. Mark has a place in my heart. We have been good friends for years. He loves adventure. Mark is extremely intelligent and humorous at the same time. Good traits to have. He always has a wise crack you can see from his mouth. He is actually listening to you. Another good trait. We have been friends for so long that anything goes. We don't try to change one another. Another good trait. Both of us are in the same field, IT. So we know what's going on in the hiring and firing in our industry. We both laugh and cry in the absurdities of life. We talk around 4 times a year. It's nice to hear about his life's adventures. Mark just completed a childhood dream when he was 10 years old. Here's a Facebook post that Mark posted on April 19, 2017. It described his sense for adventure in life. Mark. Why climb the pyramid? The year was 1963. I was 10 years old, attending Mariners Elementary School in Newport Beach, California. We had a school assembly. The father of a student that a handful of my friends might remember gave a slight presentation in the cafeteria of their family's summer vacation trip to Mexico. Many things impressed me, but I was utterly astonished and enchanted to learn that Mexico had pyramids. Up to that point, I thought only Egypt had pyramids. The sides clearly showed that this family was allowed to climb to the top of the pyramids. From that instant, it has been a dream of mine to climb to the top of the pyramid. So yes, it took me 23 years to finally make good on that dream. The cost was minimal, $300 round-trip airfare from San Francisco Airport to Mexico. Mexico is on sale right now. For whatever reason, the peso is down against the greenback. Rental cars can be had for $4 a day.
decent hotels for $40 a night. A fine inducement to go now was the fact that UNESCO was trying to make it illegal to climb all pyramids. A gringo, Borracho, a drunk American, fell off Chichen Itza a few years ago to his death and has been closed for climbing ever since. I wanted to go before all of them are closed. It was a fantastic and surreal experience. I am extremely glad I went. I am now glad I was a spy for the NSA in Central America in the late 70s and still retain much of my Spanish-speaking listening ability, which is mandatory for that job. The classmate whose father gave the presentation was Paul Cohen. Does anyone remember what became of him? I suspect he went to Corona del Mar, not Newport Harbor High School. Since I was sent to my reform school in Hawaii during the last 2 years of Newport Harbor High, I lost track of many folks. That said, I must be at least 8 good Facebook friends who attended Mariners with me and might even remember that slideshow. I cannot put in words how satisfying it was to be at the top of the pyramid on the sun on a Good Friday. Incidentally, I chose that day to go believing I would have Tenochtitlan to myself because everyone in this Catholic nation would be at church. No, they were all at Tenochtitlan. Avoid holidays. On a normal day, the UNESCO historical site 40 minutes north of Mexico City will have 10,000 visitors. On Good Friday, there were 40,000. Bucket list them accomplished. I have one friend and one relative who has climbed the pyramid, Les Jones and my cousin, Gail Demer Saracen, both of them certified these over 50 years earlier. Who else has? Paul Cohen. I really believe in synchronicity. This is from Wikipedia. Synchronicity is a concept first explained by analytical psychologist Carl Jung, which holds that events are meaningful coincidences if they occur with no causal relationship, yet seem to be meaningful related. This post of Paul God's theory got started by synchronicity of events. My friend Mark, see above, goes to Mexico and visits the pyramid at Tenochtitlan just outside Mexico City. This is his childhood dream. When he was 10 years old, he listened to the adventures at a lecture given by Paul Cohen's dad. Paul's family spent the summer in Mexico and Guatemala. Paul's dad was a doctor and did volunteer work for the summer. Mark never knew that Mexico had pyramids. So, Mark goes to Mexico and posts his adventures on Facebook. I read the post and thought, whatever happened to Paul? We go back to first grade. I haven't spoken or heard about Paul for over 46 years. That's a long time. So here's where synchronicity starts kicking in. Mark posts on Facebook. Mary Lou Picard sees the post. Mary Lou Picard. Paul Cohen is in Colorado Springs, Mark. I spoke with him last summer. I'm sure he'd love to hear about your adventure and had his family inspired you. He's on Facebook, albeit very seldom. He does check it. Mark Blackburn. Mary, thanks so much. I found Paul's Facebook page, which you are correct. He hasn't used since 2015. Still, next time in Colorado Springs, I may try to look him up. Paul Cohen. Mark, so nice to read your posts. I'm looking forward to reconnecting with you. Wow, it was nice reading of your trip to Mexico. Very cool. Interesting how you had that intent for so many years. I think our visit to Mexico and Guatemala long ago led to a couple-year volunteer in Laos, Southeast Asia. Mark Blackburn. Paul, great to hear from you, and know you are alive and presumably well. I vividly remember your father narrating that slideshow to this day. Traveling that far from home was not so common in those days. How long have you been in Colorado Springs? Paul. Yes, mostly well, thank you. Good to hear for you as well. Wow, this is an amazing story. So fun that you did that. I'm enjoying seeing your video posts. Looks like you had an incredible trip. Are you back in the United States now? And a friend of mine made that same climb this time of year, just 2 years ago. We really enjoyed it. I moved to the Springs about 25 years ago and like it. Are you in Seattle? Fletcher wrote, oh my God, Paul Cohen. Facebook has become old home week for me recently. I don't know if you remember me or not. It's fun hearing what my classmates are doing all these years later. Happy to hear tidbits about you. Mark Blackburn, Mark Mcclellan, and others. Yay Mariners, Ensign, and or Newport Harbor High School alumni. So then I send Paul a request. I see that Paul's on Facebook, so I sent him a Facebook friendly request. Paul responds, Richard, Paul Cohen has confirmed you that you're friends on Facebook. So yesterday, I was looking at Mark Blackburn's chapter. I decided to add Paul's picture. This is from the previous chapter. The classmate whose father gave the presentation was Paul Cohen. Does anyone remember what became of him? I suspect he went to Corona Del Mar, not Newport High School. I get out my Newport Harbor yearbook and snap this picture and insert above. I send Paul a message. Hi Paul, it's been many moons since we've last seen each other. I was visiting some friends last summer in Colorado Springs. I tried to look you up. Anyway, maybe next time. Paul. First, Mary Picard. Mark, now my friend Rick. Haha, can't believe it. What's happening? Wow. Rick, earliest of friends. So then we get on the phone and start talking for a few hours. Now we haven't talked since high school, but we had instant communication. It's amazing to see how a series of events connect each one of us. If Mary Lou Picard didn't contact Paul, or Mark didn't do a post of his adventures on Facebook, I wouldn't have been in contact with Paul. I remember as a kid, I was fascinated by Paul's house. It was a Japanese-style house. From what I remember, they had a courtyard with the rooms coming off from it. Instead of having ordinary doors, they had soji doors. Now as a kid, I loved anything from the Far East. I loved things outside of the box. Paul's house was stuck in a neighborhood with all standard houses of the time. The front of the house was standard, but nobody knew the jewel inside. Paul's dad was a doctor. I saw him a few times when I was a kid. Paul's dad was my brother's David's primary doctor. Back then, it wasn't unusual for a doctor treating a patient smoking a cigar. Paul and I were great friends in elementary school. I learned over the phone that Paul had been to about the same number of countries that I have been, around 35. He spent 2 years in Laos doing voluntary work. Paul tried to go to India. He had the plane tickets, but unfortunately the Bhopal gas tragedy happened in India. When Paul tried to get a visa, he was denied. Paul was a lawyer at the time. The Indian government wouldn't give him a visa. They thought he was going to India to work on the Bhopal gas tragedy. Paul tried to tell him he was going just as a tourist, but they wouldn't listen. It's a small world. Paul's mom got remarried. Her husband was a member of the Beak family from Newport Beach. I went to junior high school with his niece, Carol. This is the story from the Balboa Island Museum about the Beak family. In 1919, Joseph Allen Beak obtained the rights from the city of Newport Beach to provide a ferry service across the Newport Harbor between Balboa Island and the Balboa Peninsula. Before starting the ferry service, Beak owned the Ark. The Ark consisted of a giant rowboat with a small engine, which Beak used as the first ferry vessel. The Ark carried oars in the event of engine failure. There was no regular scheduled service, and customers telephoned Beak when they needed a ride across the harbor. In 1919, Beak charged a nickel, 5 cents per person. 3 years after commencing operation, Beak built the Fat Ferry. This vessel held 20 passengers. Beak later built a small one, a car barge with a Fat Ferry pushed across in front of it. In the 1950s, Beak built 3 double-ended wooden boats for his ferry service: the Admiral, the Commandeer, and the Captain. These 2 boats are still in service and have transported over 2 million persons. Each ferry holds 3 cars and 75 people. As of 2007, the Beaks charge $1 per adult, $2 per vehicle, and 50 cents for children ages 5 through 11, $1.25 for adults on bikes, 75 cents for children on bikes, and $1.50 for motorcycles. Children under the age of 5 are free. The ferry boat needs constant maintenance, but this does not usually interrupt the ferry service. For 2 weeks in 2008, the ferry service shut down for an extended period for the first time in 50 years to rebuild the automobile ramps leading to the boats. Currently, Beak's 3 sons run the business and has been the family for close to 100 years. Paul tells me his stepdad is an incredible character. He is in his 90s. He's driven the same Volkswagen since the 70s. Who knows how many miles he has traveled on it? Paul says he has a unique ability for photographic memory. Here's a definition of photographic memory: the ability to remember information or visual images in great detail. He also loves computers. He was involved in the early days when computer science was still in its infancy. I would love to meet him someday. He seems like the character I would love to be around. Paul says he loves to travel on the Amtrak train between Los Angeles and San Francisco. His favorite part is when the train would pass through the Hollister Ranch. Paul said each time he would reflect that the Fletcher brothers spent an incredible amount of time there during high school. Paul went to the Fletcher School in Ohio for 2 years. Paul met the family that sold their ranch to the Macro Corporation in the 60s. I wonder how the family that sold the ranch feels today. For a surfer, it'd be like selling the keys to heaven. Paul said he would tell stories to his kids about my brother and I. Paul remembers the time in 5th grade when John and I would switch classes. Paul remembers that John and I would switch shirts and then go to each other's class. All the students knew my brother and I were playing a joke. At some point in time, the entire class would start laughing. Everyone except for the teacher was on in this joke. The teacher would wonder, what's going on? Eventually the teacher would catch on and we would all laugh. These were simple times. I don't know if today the school system would appreciate this. I knew Paul's brother's Nat in high school. My brother and I were on the same track team and cross-country team in high school. Nat was best friends with Bruce Charles, a great neighbor of ours. I remember in either 5th or 6th grade, they dressed up as surfers and carried a surfboard for Halloween. I was impressed. I distinctly remember that I said, someday I'm going to be a surfer. During my phone conversations with Paul, he mentioned that with my travels to India and my love for meditation, did I ever hear about his second cousin? He was somewhat of a black sheep in the family. His name was Baba Ramdas, formerly known as Richard Albert. Did I know Ramdas? During my late teens and early 20s, Ramdas was famous in the meditation community. Richard Albert was a young psychologist during the 60s. He, along with Timothy Leary, began to explore the effects of psychotropic substances on the mind. Both of them worked at Harvard University. They began to do clinical studies on the effects of LSD and psilocybin. At that time, they weren't illegal in the country. At some point, they got fired for doing the research. They had graduate students who actively participated in their research. But one time, they had an undergraduate student. Consequently, they were fired. Timothy Leary's famous slogan was, "Tune in, turn on, drop out." Ramdas wrote the book, Be Here Now, a popular book during the 60s and 70s. Today, it's considered a modern spiritual classic. In fact, I read this book at Ananda in Nevada City before I went on my journey. To be honest, at that time, I really didn't understand the book. Books like these take practical experience to understand and to incorporate these ideas in the book. Ramdas started using drugs and meditated for the rest of his life. He used to say that drugs were training wheels. At some point, you don't need them anymore. I tried LSD once, and never again. The state of meditation brings one into our natural state, where we don't need anything artificial to open the door within. So I was completely surprised when Paul told me his second cousin was Ramdas. I saw him speak in Santa Fe, New Mexico during the 70s. I had been impressed by his work. He had tremendous influence in the population at large. He helped to bring meditation to be common among our society. During the 70s, it was considered you were on the fringe of society if you meditated. You were strange. Nowadays, yoga is mainstream. You can practice it almost everywhere. Synchronicity is so common, yet most of the time, we don't see it. Signposts are everywhere, yet we don't have eyes to see. Thanks, Paul, for being my lifelong friend. I'm so happy that we are connected again. We are all on an incredible journey of life. Craig Perkins. Craig and I became friends during my junior year of high school. Craig has a great sense of humor. I remember one time my brother and I went on a mountain excursion to a mountain park in the mountains of Orange County. There's this small trail on this cliff. The trail was probably under 2 feet wide. Well, my brother and I were petrified of crossing this. I remember walking very slowly and conscious of every step. My brother John did the same. And here comes Craig, dancing to the tune of Tiptoes to the Tulips. He would kick one foot over the hill edge and then do the same thing to his other foot. It was quite the sight to see. Craig loved the ocean. He was quite the surf photographer. He had a great cannon for his time. Craig was a kneeboarder. He could ride his kneeboard at the Newport Beach famous break the wedge on a big day. I haven't seen Craig in many years. I heard he's living in Mexico. My brother bumped into him in San Diego in the late 90s. He was in a fast food restaurant, and my brother heard Craig's voice. That was a giveaway. That was the last time we heard from him. When I first moved to Hawaii, I learned that an old junior high friend was living on Maui. I hadn't spoke to him in probably 20 years. Paul was a twin too, so we had a lot in common. Both of us were surfers. When I met him after 20 years, I was real impressed by him. He was truly a genuine human being. He carried that aloha spirit. He was a genuine. He was full of love and compassion. He had a lot of friends on this island and introduced me to them. I didn't pick up any ego from him at all. We became greater friends. I would meet him very early in the mornings at the beach. He taught me the ropes about surfing in Hawaii. He had a great sense of humor. Both of us were involved during our quest to find God. We shared a lot of love and brotherhood together. I found out that he was dying from cancer. He had cancer for 5 years. It would come and go. Paul never complained about it. When I was in his presence, I felt gratitude that I knew a human being like this. In the end, Paul died. Hundreds of surfers came to a huge party at the beach. This is what Paul wanted. He wanted each one of us to cherish life. Even amidst his death, his presence was there. Paul, wherever you are, I love you. Aloha. Nick Roth. I have known Nick since junior high school. We went on many surfing adventures in high school. Nick is one of those guys that whatever he touches turns to gold. He was good at whatever sport he played in. Yet at surfing, it seemed he was destined to be a surfer. If Nick was young today, he would be, in my eyes, one of the best surfers in the world. He would have tons of money. Nick doesn't surf for fame, fortune, or glory. He surfs because it's a part of his life. He is an artist when it comes to surfing. He has nothing to prove. He just smiles like a wise man. One funny story is about Nick and his pet. He would call me Electric Man. He said my voice would sound like an electric computer. Years later, I stopped and pondered what he said. It seems like his subconscious was onto something. He was picking something up about me and couldn't quite pinpoint it. To this day, he was one of the only people who picked up that I was different. Nick moved from Orange County to Depot Bay about 10 years ago. He still surfs at 64 years old. I saw him for the first time in years, and we connected. That time is endless. It just seems like yesterday we saw each other. In fact, it was over 30 years ago. Nick is definitely a web in my life. We have had many great journeys together. I just learned yesterday that a dear friend of mine, Randy Stapler, died last Friday. In my high school yearbook, Randy wrote the following: "A word of wisdom from a fool." Randy's one word was Om, yet he used the letter O as a yin-yang symbol. To be honest, it was quite profound for its time. Randy had a great heart. My twin brother and I ran cross-country and track together with Randy. He was always a delight to be around. I last talked to Randy only a few months back. He talked about his kids and spending time in Iraq. Both of us love to cook. We both love the ocean. We had so much in common. I would see incredible posts on Facebook for Randy and his 6 kids. They all had an incredible love for each other. The day he died, all 6 kids were there. What a beautiful way to leave this world. Randy's body died, yet his spirit is eternal. His ashes were spread across the universe. Randy is still alive. Close your eyes and go into the silence. You will sense Randy's presence. Randy lives inside of your heart. He is a part of you. So whenever you are sad about your dear dad living this planet, remember he is a part of you. Those glorious memories never go away. They are a part of you. Randy is riding the incredible wave of the universe. He is a cosmic surfer now. Some things never change. They just transform and go into another dimension. Love you, Randy. We will see your shining face again.
Jody. When I was young, my brother had a girlfriend named Jody. Now they weren't your typical boyfriend and girlfriend. They never kissed or hugged. They had a true relationship, a love that was innocent. You really can't quite describe it. Both of them tapped into the source of love. Words don't need to be spoken. It was a natural experience. Two beings simply experiencing the beauty of life. It wasn't complicated. There was no drama or heated discussions. Kindness was the essence of the relationship. Kindness is the building blocks of a good relationship. Some people say that sex is the foundation of a good relationship. Yet, in my book, kindness is the foundation of life. The universe is kind. I never saw them fight or quarrel. That never entered their state of mind. When you are innocent, these things never enter your mind. The door to negative emotions wasn't open. This is true innocence. This is purity. You love someone without any reason. Both John and Jody were incredible at kickball. They could kick that ball far into the sky. Both of them were experts in catching the ball. They knew where to stand and let the ball fall from the sky. It was a sight to see. Even Babe Ruth would have been proud. They both had a knack of kicking home runs when it was their turn to kick. Both of them were great athletes. They were graceful and not awkward. A sense of being in harmony was in the air. Some people ooze coordination and harmony. They both had it. You can't manufacture it. I was happy for my brother. He deserved it. He was kind and innocent. John didn't have a sign of arrogance. His heart was pure and open. I'm sure my brother often wonders what happened to Jody. I'm sure he has not forgotten how innocent and pure they both were. That sets the foundation for life. Steve Hudson, rest in peace. Steve was a good childhood friend. He was a surfer and loved the ocean. We were in with a great group of friends. All of us loved the ocean. The ocean was a part of our life. I always remember Steve's smile. It lit up his face. Steve had a great sense of humor. His mind had a lot of wits. I only saw Steve 2 times since high school. We were both living in Hawaii. Steve lived on the Big Island and I lived on Maui. We had a great time reconnecting. It seemed just like yesterday that we played in the ocean. Steve now has kids. The circle of life goes on. I will miss Steve, but I know that he is still alive. You see, the body dies, but the soul lives forever. The essence of Steve lives forever. Sure, I miss the physical. That's only natural. Yet death is like a butterfly flying into the night. Death is returning home. Everyone gets applauded on the other side. You see, we are eternal. That essence of Steve lives in our heart. Isn't that amazing that when a person dies, they merge with the universe? Their true essence never dies. To realize this, our perception of death changes. Sure, We will still have the pain, but it will be less. Can you imagine dying and becoming one with the universe? Wow. Every single one of us will return home someday. I will miss Steve, yet a part of Steve exists inside of me. I can still see his smile. Steve, rest in peace. It was an honor to know you.